Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
My God, it's full of stars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by, I'm going to say Doctor Cyclops. I was going to say something, but I can't remember what. Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm doing all right. I have been focusing on harnessing radiation, and I won't tell you for what devious thing I have planned.
So you don't have a secret mine in your back garden?
I may.
Yeah.
I reserve the right.
Digging up radium. This week, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking. Last week, I should say, we jumped right into season 4 with 1930s. Just imagine. This episode, we're jumping forward 10 years to 1940, and a film I'm pretty sure no one will have heard of. Doctor Cyclops from 1940. So it's sort of, I've got all kinds of names that probably mean nothing to don't mean anything to anyone. Albert Decker, Janice Logan, Thomas Cooley, and I haven't got who directed it. But I've got you can probably hear I've got the copy here. We watched it, so we're going to talk about Doctor Cyclops. So Julian, first and foremost, actually, should we give him a sort of? I'm so all over the place today. Let's give him a very quick summary.
Sounds good.
I'm not even sure what jungle it's supposed to be, but basically in the depths of the jungle, there is a doctor, a scientist, our sort of titular Doctor Cyclops, working on all kinds of different pieces of work, something secret and hidden, and he calls on several other scientists to come and join him to validate some of his work. They trek endlessly into the jungle. They get there, they literally look in a microscope for 5 minutes, give their opinion, and he says thank you very much and tries to send them on their way. They don't want to leave, and so they sort of stick around and find out that what he is doing is shrinking down and reducing down living animals. He's doing it to a horse and to endless numbers of other animals, and eventually when he realizes he is found out, he shrinks down these other visiting scientists. It must be South American jungle, because you have his South American helper, and then they have to survive in all the usual ways that shrunken people have to survive, and eventually take on Dr. Cyclops.
You say this like it's lived experience. Like all the usual threats we face when we're shrunk down.
Well, this felt so sort of. This is the first time I've watched this. I chose this one. I chose it because I went through and I was like, I want something weird from the 40s. Like, what was I never heard of that'll be quite cool? And I found this. But in watching it, I was like, oh, like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and Land of the Giants and all these other shows. I was like, oh, okay, like this is well sort of trodden territory, really. But it's good fun, and it's actually I really enjoyed a lot of this. I think I want to talk about some of the special effects as well. But it's a very sort of simple story. And I can't remember some of the things. I can't remember some of the names. Peruvian, it even says here, the Peruvian jungle. And so yeah. But what were your thoughts on Doctor Cyclops as a whole?
Well, first of all, I think that it immediately struck me as very similar to those sort of 1930s films. And I was reminded of King Kong. And it's interesting that this director, Ernest B. Shostak, was the director of King Kong. He also directed The Most Dangerous Game, which I'm a fan of, 32. So there is, especially the look and feel of it, reminds me of those 30s movies. And I did find myself thinking about King Kong a lot. I think that those films, and someday we'll talk about them, and I look forward to that, tend to have sort of a classic structure. I like their structure. They don't go on a whole lot of digressions. There isn't, 30 characters, all whom, we meet like a modern day King Kong, right? We spend 30 minutes learning about Jack Black and, what drives him as a person. No, in the 30s, you get in and you get out, right?
Yeah.
And, this has that kind of structure. At the same time, it also feels very 1950s. So it's a sort of transition from those 30s films to the 1950s with the special effects, with, the shrunken sort of motif. So I think the structure of it is very 30s. The focus on special effects is, obviously King Kong is a special effect, but it's a different kind of special effect. And it feels sort of 1950s, like it's sort of silly plot that's really there to service that special effect.
Yeah, the whole film is sort of centered around the sort of the third act, isn't it? Really, the sort of like, and I see what you're saying about sort of that. There's a definite 30s feel to it because all the characters, sort of like say, feel of that era, and just so stereotypical, and even the arc between you sort of like, so basically sort of like you have this Doctor Cyclops, this sort of the titular character. That's not his real name. I've actually forgotten his name. I'm going to bring it up on IMDb to remember. But he's off in the jungle, and the
Dr.
characters,
Thorkel, Alexander Thorkel.
The characters that go see him, the sort of like the trope of the you have the sort of what's we're looking for really, sort of like the austere sort of like scientist. Who Dr. Bullfinch, that's right, so Dr. Bullfinch, who's like, do you not know who I am, kind of sort of character. Dr. Mary Robinson again, who's sort of like the feisty and strong sort of female character. And then is he just called Bill Stockton? But you got the other sort of laid back sort of doctor as well, who's very much sort of like I don't really want to be here, but I'm doing it for financial reasons. He's sort of like the rogue, the character. But that roguishness never really pays off because he's not supposed to be, he's not supposed to be sort of like too much of a sort of a dandy or a bad character. He's just meant to be a little bit, he's got a bit of a bad reputation, but he's supposed to be generally likable. And so, you get those sort of, the tropes are there. These characters have sort of been worn out, I think, through a number of different kinds of things. Even to the fact of like Dr. Bullfinch, his style, or what he's, he has that sort of very pointy goatee beard and the mustache and stuff like that. Is such a typical look that he even looks like the main. If you have watched the Umbrella Academy, and you've seen the character. Of the professor in that, like that's what he looks like it's that look. So it's become such a sort of a typical look that it's not sort of it's very much they haven't been too adventurous when it comes to sort of the character styles or character designs in this. So but it still works. Like I enjoy all that. Also it's in Technicolor, and it's been I think it's upgraded, but the version I had was really good. Like it was a really clean version, and it looked fantastic. So I quite enjoyed that.
Yeah, and I think that the special effects need to be mentioned. I mean, you said that. I mean, not only is it in Technicolor, this is 1940. Remember what a big deal like Wizard of Oz was.
Yeah.
This is Technicolor. It's a big deal here. The other thing is that this is thought by many to be the first case of those shrunken effects in a movie. And so, it looks like they're mostly using rear projection, but, you're talking about like all those tropes. Well, this movie kind of invented a lot of them, at least in cinema.
Yeah.
So, I mean, kudos where they're due. You're right about how the characters are sort of stock characters, and I can't keep them straight except that's the professor guy who not to jump ahead to the ending, but at the ending you find out that Bill and Mary, Bill Stockton, that guy, and
Yeah.
Mary are in love. And it's the usual sort of 30s thing where nobody stops to say, golly, we lost a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like this was a harrowing experience. We'll have PTSD from this forever. And instead it's like, well, I realized I loved you on this journey, Oh, Bill. It's like, who are these characters again?
There's a great line. I'm trying to find the character's name because there's like the miner character, isn't it? He's a mine, the mine leader. Is it Steve Baker? Whoever the sort of he owns the sort of like the mules that they're going to ride.
Yeah.
Well, I'm like protecting my assets. I'm coming with you. And at the end of the film, his line is basically like, "Well, we can't tell anyone about this because they'll think we're crazy." The end. So
Yeah.
we're not going to resolve that one at all. So yeah, but I kind of like some of that stuff. Like you said, it follows that sort of simple structure. It just wants to tell a fun story. Like you said, we're not going to get the background of Doctor Cyclops or Doctor Thorkel. We're not going to get him as sort of, like you say, flashbacks of him as a child and sort of like get why he's sort of so obsessed with radium or shrinking or something like that. Like we don't need it. It's just the way he is.
His parents were killed by radium,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, you're not going to get that extraneous stuff. I mean, I do think that this movie has an odd way of not giving you, or at least not underlining, the key information that you kind of need. Like you not remembering that it's a Peruvian jungle, which I didn't remember either, is a key thing. Like I kept finding myself sort of rewinding and saying like, wait a minute, why are they going there again? Because it's like one line, and it's because basically Thorkel, has bad vision and needs them to look through a microscope, like.
But that's never actually explained to them.
No,
like to the main characters, like that's never explained to them as to why they're going. They think they're being invited to become a part of his work. So when they turn up and he's like, "Can you have a look at this?" And he actually says like, "Yeah, my eyes, they're not what they used to be." And then they have a look at it, and I think the young guy, Bob Stockton, he identifies iron deposits in whatever he can see, and he's like, "Oh, okay, well, thank you. You've actually confirmed everything I thought. You can go now." But even apologies for the pun, but like that's so short-sighted to bring someone in to have a look at a telescope and then send them away. Well, what are you going to do tomorrow when you're going to need someone to look at this again?
Right.
Like it seems so baffling. But like you say, it doesn't want to hammer certain things home. Like it knows, well, it doesn't think certain bits of information are important. So it does sort of glide over them.
But it's even major stuff like, Thorkel is killed, after, I will say the plot really picks up after there's shrunk. I mean, and that's maybe like half an hour in. Until then I'm sort of like, why am I watching this again? And then after they're shrunk, it's like, oh, this is quite fun. Look at this set. Look at how they're doing this. However, when Doctor Cyclops examines, Bullfinch, and he murders him. He sort of, basically, here's two instances of things that are not communicated well. He says, right, this confirms my suspicions, which seems to be based on the weight, along with he's already gotten the height of about 12 inches tall of Bullfinch. And so based on the weight, he's like, oh, yes, this confirms my suspicion. Basically, you're growing.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to be like growing organically. He doesn't say like the effect is wearing off. He says you're growing. So it's like, are they going to become deformed, as they grow? Like babies turn into humans and they're going to, and then, so that's that's not communicated well. And then he proceeds to put a chemical on a sort of cotton swab and push it. And it's done pretty well with this mock-up of a giant hand and all of that, especially where they have both Dr. Cyclops in the background and the giant hand in the foreground kind of coming off the side of the screen. It's done really well. And then he puts that, formaldehyde or, whatever it is in the face of Bullfinch, we're supposed to know that that's murdering Bullfinch. Bullfinch never comes back. I thought, oh, he's knocking him out or something. Today that's a cliche for knocking him out.
Yeah, I was convinced that they were going to find him in a cage before the end of the film. I was convinced that, they're going to find him in a box somewhere, and that's going to be that's going to be the rescue. Yeah, but you're right. Like, he never comes back, and by the end of the film, I was like, oh, I assume he's dead then. Like, that was it. But again, like you say about the growing thing is almost the opposite. They're almost trying to give you information because they get to the end of the film. The growing thing is to sort of allow for the end of the film, because they obviously kill spoilers. They obviously kill Doctor Cyclops, and they're still small, and so it's this thing of like, but they're going to grow. So when they turn up at the end of the film, like, sort of, what is it, like a couple of months later, or he says like 2 months later, almost like, SpongeBob SquarePants style, 2 months later, like they're fully grown and they're back to normal. And I'm going, I actually did. I was going like, did they figure out how this technology worked? No, they grew. Oh, okay.
It's an odd cut, but they don't even say that they grew, right?
No.
I mean, you're right. That must be what happened, because you never see a reversal of this ray. But you just cut to 2 months later and they're full size, and you have to assume, oh, they grew. But grew is such a weird way of putting it. And we both had the problem of thinking, yeah, Bullfinch is still alive. He's just like knocked out in some area. You never see his body. Nope. Even the guy who gets shotgunned, 2 out of these 5 don't survive. He gets shotgunned, and it's done fine. I mean, although I would point out shotguns don't blow neat little 5-inch diameter holes in doors. But, okay, it's done fine. But they just leave his body there, and never talk about it again.
Well, no, yeah, there's 2 things about that as well, which I thought was interesting. Because they show, like you said, it comes after, actually, they show like a hole being blown through a door. But that's cinema cliche. Like, I've seen that a number of times. That's fine. So I'm forgiving of the thing of the hole in the door, because also the other thing is that obviously has to match, because they do like a scaled version, don't they, for them to climb through and stuff. So I understand that. What I was less sort of forgiving of, and again, this is a 1940s film, so they would never do the full gore. But I'm thinking, if a 12-inch person gets shot by a shotgun at relatively close range, like, you just seem like it's like an action figure falls off a cliff sort of thing. I'd be like, no, he would have been blown backwards and in pieces. Like, it would have shredded him. But that obviously, like, 1940 wasn't ready for that level of gore. Like, you remade this now, that character sort of like, go get like A24 or Blumhouse to make this now. Have that person smeared across the sort of the side of the cliff.
No, there'd be imagine sort of Hostel with shrunken people who you're experimenting on. Right, let's cut off this person's fingers one by one. They're just a mouse to me. Yeah.
But I do like all that sort of, like, say, when he is shrunk, there's sort of all the stuff that goes on in that point. Like, from the point they're shrunk, it's really good fun. Like, I think it's really sort of, because the thing I will give this film credit for, I say, you talk about the rear projection, the special effects, because often, even beyond this point, because they must have worked incredibly hard to have the timing down, because that's where it sort of falls short, isn't it? Like, those points of the eyesight, the line of sight, but also the timing often is slightly out or off, and sort of like, people react either too late or too early because they've got the projections lined up and stuff. But in this, it works incredibly well. But that point when Dr. Bullfinch is caught, and his big hand sort of comes in, and its fingers close round him and stuff, and it's really well done. I was really impressed with that. I really enjoyed that. But again, the way they've done the rear projection stuff, like the horse on the table when he's examining it and stuff, I was like, okay, that's cool. But then when they are shrunk and they have the massive sets, is so cool. Like, at one point, like, Bullfinch has got he's climbing across a book to read it, and you've got Pedro sort of like cutting up a sausage, and they're doing stuff like, I was like, I was really impressed with. I was like, this is so cool. This is a physical set. Like, this is a massive physical set. At one point,
Yeah.
Pedro gets off the table by running and jumping onto a deck chair, like and then jumping off. I was like,
and using it like a trampoline.
Yeah, I was like, all this stuff is here. They've done that. I was so impressed with whenever the physical, scaled sets were being used. I was really impressed.
No, I agree 100%. And it's right from the beginning as they're strung sort of in the basement, and he says, "Well, why don't you climb up the stairs?" And you cut to a shot of the stairs with them climbing up, and you realize, oh wow, they've built like a 50-foot tall stairs mock up and have these people climbing it. And of course, more stuff comes later. You have the giant scissors, you have the giant needle, like for needle and thread. That's quite well done. But there really is like you said, there's a lot of care taken in those giant sets. And there are times where the line of sight is a little off or somebody holds a little too long. And there are sometimes where the giant set like matches, but you're cutting to it and you're not really showing the overall room. So you're like, right, those guys are hiding behind the boots. I guess that's in the corner there. But, one thing that I really admire and appreciate is how, and this does seem to be a lost art and something that I do associate with earlier screenwriting, is how thoughtful and ingenious these characters are. That they want to get away on a canoe. They rig a lever system.
Yes.
They're really going at it. I mean, they pile up books to escape and move a door handle. A bar that bars a door closed. So there really is a lot of sort of like, these are not dumb characters. And I quite like that. It's not just watch them run away as somebody swats at them. Yeah,
it's not peril after peril after peril that they address things. No, they consider stuff. Like you said, the bit with the canoe, like they say, like there's actually a great conversation because they talk to Bob, what's his name, sort of the Bill Stockton. They're like, you're an engineer. How would you do this? And then he's obviously being a smart ass, and he's like, well, you're a scientist. What do you expect? But they rig up a pulley system to move the canoe off the beach into the water, and they are doing it. And so it's like you say. And also there are other things like when the crocodile attacks and they scare it off using fire. Now, the one thing I would say though, and this is one of those things I do find funny when they have these sort of shrinking things. They're like, well, we need to save the wood. And you're like, what, I mean those twigs?
Yeah.
That will burn through in seconds. Because then the fire's like burning like a normal fire, just a lot smaller. And I'm like, that's not how fire works. But I forgive that because I find everything else so well done. So because I'm enjoying all the other bits, like you say, you sort of forgive some of the bits, although they must have, and again, for Peter, if you're watching that, this is 1940, it was a long time ago. They literally do obviously kick or push like slightly burning sticks onto a crocodile's face, which you're like, couldn't do that now, but it works then, so it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, there is the humor of as they're in the jungle. And you see sort of like there's a bear and, then there's like a leopard or, it's like, right. Like there are like 5 enormous wild animals, like I'm pretty sure there isn't, it looks like a bear in Yellowstone or something, in the Peruvian jungle. Like how many of these animals are within a 5-foot radius of these people? That's ridiculous. But then you have that alligator bit that's smart. You have the canoe bit that's smart. You have I was thinking of that Twilight Zone episode that we talked about that I'm such a fan of with the shrunken people on the Patreon. Yeah. And that same sense of sort of like, oh, this is deadly serious. And the surreality of it, but at the same time, a real sense of stakes. And I think that's got to be hard to pull off. And sometimes this movie fails, but at other times it does succeed. And a great example is the shrunken people rigging a shotgun.
Yes.
And they've got string, and they've loaded the shotgun and they're coordinating to aim it at Dr. Cyclops' bed, and it's like, man, this is some mischievous stuff. This is devious.
This is like Gremlin style sort of like devious. Yeah, no, they're like waiting for him to go to sleep, and they're going to shoot him with a shotgun.
Mhm.
It goes some places. Because you're right, like like when you talk about the examination of Dr. Bullfinch, one of the things we'll talk about, I think, Dr. Thorkel or Dr. Cyclops as a character in a minute, but like that scene when there's a great when they first escape, because they do get up those stairs, and the Doctor sort of follows them, and all he is doing is observing. Like, he's letting them escape to like, well, let's see what happens. He's like, well, I've reduced you, but like physical musculature is perfect, movement perfect, speech perfect. So like all he's doing is letting them escape so that he can observe them. And then obviously, like a mouse. So then he gets hold of Dr. Bullfinch. He just measures it. He measures him with a ruler, and then he gets the pincers to measure the size of his head and all that. And like you say, it's creepy to me because it's just so cold. There's no concern or anything. It's just like, well, look, this is a breakthrough from my point of view. So I'm actually going to use you and study you and stuff. And it is, and if you were to fully understand that he then kills Dr. Bullfinch, and he's like, you could be even further and be like, oh, time for an autopsy. I'm gonna cut this thing open. Like, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't. I don't know if they could get away with it in 1940. Not show it, but like at least allude to it. Like, Dr. Bullfinch, unfortunately, now I have to do a full internal examination, and then he squishes his face with the cloth. Like, but I would fully accept and believe that that's what Thorkel is going to do. And this film sort of isn't, well, it never actually fully goes there. Like, you could imply that. Like, I understand that's like, it's going to have that sort of connotation. So, yeah, I was digging all that kind of stuff in those moments.
Yeah, I mean, I like that too. I wonder about the conflict, this central conflict between them, and it seems to me that Bullfinch is partially to blame. He is so defiant. Yes. I mean, if you have been shrunk down and you're like, right, we're helpless, we're in this dude's basement, and he's like, you point out that Dr. Cyclops is pretty cold. He obviously wants to observe them. He has no qualms about killing them. He's not bothered by the fact that he shrunk a legion of animals and basically fed them to his cat, and watched them die. And you're given this absurd explanation that pointing out these deposits have somehow let Dr. Cyclops stabilize the shrinking process, whatever. But I do wonder if you were those shrunken people, wouldn't you say, all right, look, obviously you have us. You are an amazing scientist. Let's work together here. Wouldn't you want to suck up to Dr. Cyclops a little, and maybe once you, then if you do grow back to regular size, then you can ambush him, or not. It does seem that Dr. Cyclops he's a bad guy, right? Mm-hmm. But it's not clear to me that he clearly doesn't care if he kills them, but it's not clear to me that he shrunk them down and he doesn't know if they'll survive, but he is interested in them. He keeps saying how proud he is of them, which is, sort of creepy, but, I guess he's kind of admiring that their brains haven't deteriorated as part of this process. But, it does seem like there is at least the possibility of a more amicable relationship here. And I blame Bullfinch for a lot of that.
No, I agree with that, because that scene when I mentioned about him reading a book and he's crawling across it, like he's already been shrunk, and he actually says he's wrong. He actually he calls it, says Thorkel is wrong about this, and I think it's the Bill Stocks maybe. He actually says, I don't think so. Like, look at us,
yeah.
He seems to be pretty right so far, and so he isn't. That's what I'm saying. Like, that character, sort of the Bullfinch, he's still defiant, as you say. Sort of, there's an arrogance. He doesn't like to have been proven wrong. or to be used in this way. Like, he's just indignant about the whole thing. And like you say, it could have been a situation, even in that basement, where they could have said, all right, well, we are where we are. I don't want to be like this. How do we resolve this? All right, we don't want to talk about it or whatever. Like that, yeah. But like that would have been, I think, a less exciting film. But I agree that Bullfinch has definitely got something sort of like because before he is examined, because they are in that scene, and he basically says, "I'm going to talk to him."
Yeah.
And just marches off, and everyone else is like, "Oh, well, all right, probably not the best idea, but."
You're the leader, kind of.
Yeah, de facto leader in this case, so we can't sort of go against you. So, yeah, it's. I agree with what you're saying.
But don't you think that sort of takes away a little from Dr. Cyclops' villainy? That obviously he is, a mad scientist figure, right? I mean, he's created this process to harness the power of uranium and radium to shrink people. Because, atomic stuff does whatever the hell you want in 1940. And actually, this is one of the earliest cases of atomic energy being used by mad scientists. So, I mean, this is 1940. This is, 5 years before the A-bomb. So, I mean, I do think that, yes, he's a mad scientist. Yes, he's cold. Yes, he's calculating. He's clearly fine with killing a whole bunch of animals.
Yeah.
He would rather kill than let these people report back. He doesn't care about summoning them and, for nothing. But I'm not sure that he's not like a mustache twirling villain.
I'm glad this is what I wanted to talk about. Actually. This is because you're right. He's just cold and I wouldn't say calculated. Like, he's obsessed with his thing. Like, this is his work. Like, this thing about the radium and stuff. And again, I want to get into how he's doing it. Like the idea they have of this thing being dropped into the mine shaft. Like, I like that. That sort of the thought of how it's being processed. But all this is this obsession with work, isn't it? This is not like my mission. This is my baby. This is my life. This work. And so it's about a commitment. So nothing he does. All right, he shrinks them, but it's not. But he never actually, I don't know. The villainy is almost. It wasn't his intent. Like, he didn't lure them out there to kill them. He has an arrogance, and he's clearly not. He's. I don't know. Sort of. He's not all there. Like, his social. He even admits it. He's like, it's been 2 years. I'm not entirely sure like social etiquette. Like, I've lost a little bit of that. But he's not villainous. He's sort of driven. I don't know, even driven. Like, he turns, he decides he's going to kill them and stuff because they're trying to escape. And he doesn't really want that. So, but I don't know. I never see him as sort of like the villain until the end. He doesn't become like the villain until the end, when sort of like, he obviously there's even has a terrible line like where one of his glasses gets broken and he says, "Oh, now you can truly call me Doctor Cyclops because I only have one good eye." And you're just like, that's a stupid line.
Well, it's really stupid that he's called Dr. Cyclops. I mean, they make this, Ulysses sort of Greek reference that does not make sense, that is not accurate at all. And it's just there to set up that line, right? I mean,
yeah, totally.
And that's a cool name for the villain, right? He doesn't have to be called Dr. Cyclops. No.
This totally feels like someone signed off on a title and then they were like, make me a film. And they were like, okay.
But what's so weird is this is not the movie you'd make under the, it's like, Dr. Thorkel's Amazing Shrinking Ray or something would be a more appropriate.
It's just, but you have, I don't know, he never feels to me like a true, like you said, mustache twirling villain.
He's a sociopath, but he's not outright evil.
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, he lacks empathy and stuff. Like, he doesn't care, but like the fact he doesn't care just means he literally just doesn't care. Like, when they were off into the jungle at one point, he's almost like, and then he realizes he's obviously got to tidy up loose ends, and he does what he does. But it's never like, it's not like impassioned, as in like, I'm gonna kill you. It's and so it sort of felt to me. I was thinking about mad scientists, and you get that sort of like Doctor Victor Frankenstein and being lured away. But the one it made me think of is the Island of Dr. Moreau.
Mm-hmm.
And that it felt very much like that. This sort of felt like that sort of story, sort of just coming across this thing of going like, and that situation, and Dr. Moreau being in a very similar thing of like, look at my animals, look at what I've done, and not really understanding like how horrific it is what he's done, and not being almost confused. And so it feels like that, and it's sort of. But you're right. Does it take anything away from the film? Like, should he be more villainous? Would it have been more? Would the stakes have been more? If it had been more a bit like, now I've lured you here, I can test this on humans. You go, I don't know.
No, I don't need him to be more arch. I just don't know that the movie knows what it wants to be. And I think that's true. Like, we talked about this sort of like romantic ending, right? Like, that those characters aren't shown to be falling in love. They're not really,
At any point.
It's just, no, and they don't even say like, well, we've been through this great ordeal together. It's just like, by the way, we're in love.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess. I mean, so, along those lines, I sort of feel like it's called Doctor Cyclops, right? He's not particularly cyclopean. I mean, he's, a professor with bad eyesight, who has done this amazing thing. He's sort of sociopathic. I mean, I don't need him to be outright evil. I don't know that would improve the film, but it does seem as if, at least based on the title, and then also like, he's alone, he's out there in the middle of nowhere with nobody. And, he's done this amazing scientific breakthrough, but he has, I mean, there's no motivation there. I don't know what if the movie wants us to think he's a villain, or the movie is just like a funny thing happened in the Peruvian jungle.
No, I think the film, they want you to think of him as a villain. I'm convinced of that. But like you said, they're not entirely sure how to maintain him as a villain. And this becomes, because this also comes to the motivations of, let's call them the hero group. Because you have the mining guy, I'll check his name, whatever his name is, who comes up with the
Bill Stockton?
Or was he Steve Baker, whichever one. One of those guys. They're so sort of interchangeable, but the guy with the mules, the older guy.
Oh, Steve Baker, yeah.
Yeah. He's a miner, so he knows mining ore, and he recognizes there's a pit and it's this rare ore. And so his motivation is, look at what we found basically in the back garden of this Doctor Cyclops, Dr. Thorkel. We could make a fortune off this. And there's no recognition of going like, I know it's sort of like in the middle of the jungle, but this is clearly like his work. Like the motivation straight away is like, oh, we can mine this and we can sell this ore. And they, at one point, he even makes a comment about, a couple of million split between four is actually pretty good. And so their thought pattern straight away is, we can make a fortune.
Right.
And so the doc comes out and says, no, this isn't for selling. I don't mine this to sell. I mine it for the energy, and this is how I do it. And I dip this thing in, and it absorbs the energy, blah, blah. So straight away, like, they're actually, they're not clean. They're innocent in of themselves. They've come and they're already going like, oh, we can strip him of his resources. Like, there's actually something else we can get out of this. Having been lured here, we can now get something out of this. And so I think about like 40s, or even like late 30s, early 40s, I don't know, like movie morality. Like, they clearly clearly see Dr. Cyclops as the villain. Mm-hmm. Because he's a mad scientist in the jungle. Like, that's enough for him to be villainous. He's doing these things, whatever. But like you say, he never has that motivation. His MO isn't to lure people out to test on them. Like, this isn't
right.
That thing. And he's not like he's building up a cult like around this thing or whatever. Like, I was thinking of, like, what's the film? Marlon Brando just popped into my head. I was thinking of Island Dr. Moreau, and I thought of Marlon Brando, which then took me to Apocalypse Now. like this Colonel Kurt sort of sat in the jungle, sort of going like, I can shrink things now. I'm God, kind of thing. Like, there's none of that. Like, he's not, like you say, arch. He's not a villain. He just wants to get on with it. He was supposed to be left alone for the most part to get on with it.
Well, he kind of wants to study them. I mean, you're right about how he's not Kurt. That's a good point. He could easily say, right, I am your god now. He doesn't say anything like that. The other thing is he lets them climb those stairs. And I can't get away from this idea that I have that sort of Bullfinch is responsible for this antagonism. Because right away, he's facing being exposed and, for what he's doing, and they're very confrontational, and he captures them and shrinks them down, right? All right, so he's using them for a human experiment.
Yeah.
It's not good. But then he says, he's very polite to them. He lets them climb the stairs, and then he promptly falls asleep. And when they figure out a way out, he says, "Oh, I'm so proud of you." And he could easily run into that courtyard and grab them and kill a couple. Instead, he yells from the window about how he's proud of them, and he doesn't have menace in his voice. And then he wants to talk to Bullfinch, but he doesn't put them in a cage. I mean, he's quite content to fall asleep with them, and when they have escaped, he's happy for them. He does not seem threatened by them, or I mean, it'd be so easy just to put them in a cage and say, right, I'm going to sleep now. I will not even dissect you, but I'll continue my experiments when you wake up. Oh, right, this is our chance. We've got to escape. None of that dynamic is there.
No, because you're saying that one of the things is they have this. There's one of the character that is used as a bit of a threat and used for a set piece is the cat, Satanus, which is a great name. I love that. You have this evil cat and a really sort of like cheerful dog that's sort of like everything, Pedro's dog. But like you said, he could have easily put them in a bird cage or something, had it sort of like elevating. Oh, I'm putting you here for your own safety, so Satanus can't get you. And then the cat just sat asleep on the floor, and how did he escape? Like, all these things, like that's what I was expecting. Like that arch. Yeah, but it's not there, is it? Like, he's not a villain, like you say. So it's. I
want to get back to I want to get back to that cat, but I mean, I don't even know that would be that arch, right? Like, I mean, wouldn't it be logical if you have shrunk these people who were about to expose you or know what you're doing and are going to leave? Wouldn't it be logical to say, right, I'm going to keep you in the basement now? I mean, I'm going to keep you in the bottom of the pit. Instead, he just goes to sleep. I mean, it's as if they're his guests almost.
Yeah. I don't know. You're right. It's bizarre because then he just sort of lets them go. I don't know. Maybe he thinks they're going to be either eaten by Satanus or go off into the jungle and be eaten by something else, and he just doesn't care because he's got what he needs from them. Because he does make a point to Dr. Bullfinch at one point when because Dr. Bullfinch says, "Oh, we shall get away and do this," and he says that's quite a lot. That's quite a long way on legs as short as yours.
Yes.
So I don't think he thinks they're going to make it through the jungle.
I agree. No, I agree. But clearly, like, he may be impressed with them about like things like the shotgun, right? I mean, he doesn't, really react much to that except to see what they've done and grab it. But he's sort of impressed with their ingenuity. He seems to look down on them. Maybe that's part of his sort of egotism, his sociopathy, his narcissism. I agree with you that he doesn't see them as a threat, but he just seems so oddly non-hostile that it's hard to feel that he's all that evil.
Yeah, I mean, even if they, like say, he was to say, or you found out that like Dr. Bullfinch had been fed to Satanus, like something that's just sort of like some sort of like passive evilness or something. Because it sort of suggested that's what I said, like that's what has happened to all the former animals. So they find that the skeletal remains like a 4-inch pig, and he jokes about it. So it's one of those, if you read between the lines, like that's probably what happened to Dr. Bullfinch. But But again, I'm filling in my own sort of like, head canon for these things. But you're right, he is. He's so sort of like passive until he's not. And then he's like, well, I'm going to burn down the bleeding jungle to find you. I don't know. Yeah. He does things. And that's the thing. Like, there's a switch at one point, like, because he then starts to do things. And I wonder if, the switching point is when he finds the shotgun. Like you say, his reaction is to grab it. But beyond that, like, that's when he starts sort of to hunt them down. Like, he goes out after them, he shoots Pedro, he sets the grass on fire to smoke them out, and it's almost like that was almost a bit too, it's almost ungrateful. Sort of like, how dare my guests try and shoot me in my sleep?
Well, I mean, it might come a little earlier than that, because he does seem to sort of play host. He sees that they've escaped, right? And then he examines Bullfinch and, we have to assume, kills him. And then he goes out and he hacks that cactus up that they're hiding in, that the cat menaces. Clearly, at that point, he's willing to kill them. Yeah. That hacking up the cactus, he assumes they're underneath and these hacks are going to cut them. And then sees they've escaped into the jungle and is like, all right, they're going to die out there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at that point, he's already antagonistic. But then he goes hunting for them. But it is, in fairness to him and to your point, it's not just the shotgun. It's the fact that they have systematically taken and hidden or destroyed all of his glasses.
Yes.
Which is a neat idea, right? I mean, that's why he is nearsighted to begin with. It's so that they sort of like have a chance against him. And that's good stuff. I mean, that's a nice little. Well,
it's clever. It's clever. It's that sort of thing again. They're thinking things through. Like, okay, we found that there's a drawer full of his spare glasses. Well, let's get rid of them. And then he's down to one, and we can do something about that. Like, it's them thinking things through. Like, these seem sort of like, quite common sense approaches to things. Actually, like, they've actually been quite pragmatic about things. So yeah, I get that. But
yeah, I mean, but he, like, wouldn't you? I mean, like, I know you are never going to be an occasion to be living in the jungles of Peru, shrinking people down. Having said that, I mean, if people are trying to kill you with a shotgun in your sleep, like you're in some true crime show or something, and they've stolen all of your glasses, and they know you're basically blind without them. I mean, at that point, this is just war, and he even says something like that. So it's not that he's not. Obviously, he kills Bullfinch before that, and he's hacking up the cactus, and he goes and hunts them and tries to burn those reeds down. But then he just goes back. He doesn't know that he's captured them. He seems to think. He doesn't even seem to burn the canoe, so they don't have an escape. He's just like, all right, well, I killed one of them with a shotgun. Yeah, okay, it's an antagonistic relationship, but they have escalated it. And they even say their goal is to murder him.
Yes.
Like, I've had it with him, let's kill him.
Yeah. That would have made, if that was the approach to every time someone got shrunk, that would have made the motivations in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids very different.
Alternatively, it might make that movie make a lot more sense. Yeah,
that'd be an interesting comparison piece to this.
We're doing Fantastic Voyage later, so there is another shrinking this season.
There is. Yeah, you're right. No, it's funny because again, if you look at the advertising for this, but even the sort of, I have this on DVD now. And obviously, if you look at the trailer, like, it's all about him being the menace. Like, can they escape the clutches of the terrible Doctor Cyclops? And on the back of this, they describe him as, but the half-blind, half-mad scientist will have none of that and uses an experimental body-altering device to reduce his former friends to 1/5 of their size. They're not former friends. He does refer to them as friends at one point, but like almost in that sort of, they're not friends, but sort of like, well, we're here, we're sort of like, we're all in the same place, we have a similar goal sort of thing. But like, yeah, he's not this sort of like mad diabolical scientist, is he? It's not Which is funny because that's sort of what I was expecting. I was expecting this thing of sort of like luring people to sort of to test on them or take revenge on someone who wronged him previously. Sort of like, that thing of that other cliche that they said I was mad that this couldn't be done. I'll show them. Like that was almost what I was expecting to be like, Dr. Bullfinch being a former partner or mentor or something that he's now lured down to the Peruvian jungle to shrink him and then hunt him or something. I don't know, like that would have probably made more sense. But yeah, he's not hugely combative. In fact, if anything, if they'd escaped and made it, I'm pretty sure he'd just carried on doing his due. Like it just, the film would have ended there.
Yeah, he doesn't, even though he wants to test them. It's not that his agenda was to have test subjects.
No.
I mean, and you're right about sort of like how this film is sold. You see those movie posters, and it's those, well, watch out it's those intellectuals, right? It's like the Cultural Revolution, right? I mean, if you wear glasses, that means you read. That is dangerous. You're a baddie, bad. So those glasses staring down, menacing a woman, menacing the people. But you're right at how easy a fix that would be to just say, oh, there's some relationship there, with the people who come to him, right? Like he's disappeared. He's been off the radar for too long. I need to go find my friend, Dr. Livingston in the jungle. There are easy fixes for this, but it really just does not seem willing or interested in really portraying Dr. Cyclops as bad.
No, which is I find odd. Like I say, because he comes to sort of like quite a, I don't know, I suppose it's quite a brutal ending, really. Again, it's interesting how they've done it. Again, because I think the special effects are actually really good for the time. But you keep seeing he's got this pit in the back, this mining pit that he has in his back garden, and he drops this sort of device, this technology down into it, and he sort of says, "Oh, well, it sort of." I don't know how the technology works. It's clear sort of sci-fi bunkum, but it's like, well, I don't mine the ore. I just send this thing down and it absorbs the radiation and sort of like then uses it as a power source to do these things. And they're like, okay, that's cool. That all makes fine. So you then have this sort of like Chekhov's gun of this pit is mentioned throughout, and it has like a board that goes across it, and there's a winch that sends this thing down. All that is then utilized in the sort of the final confrontation with Dr. Cyclops. And I liked all of that. Like they run down, and because they're little, they can sort of hide in little nooks within the sort of the side of it. The board gives way and it falls, and then they undo the winch and he falls. Like he falls into this pit full of radiation. And so I'm like, oh, well, that's not only gonna be painful, but like, yeah, you are irradiated now. Like your skeleton can't be touched now for the next like 1,000 years. But again, like I say, he gets this really sort of like say quite brutal end. And again, there's part of me going back, going like, well, this could have all been avoided. Because when they do go into, because when they break into his house, because that's what they do. Don't forget, like he thinks he sent them away, and they literally break into his domicile, sort of start. That's what's ransacking it, but they're searching through everything.
They're reading his notes and
they're reading his notes. They're opening cupboards and drawers and looking for stuff. So when he comes in and he's annoyed, like rightfully so, he's like, "What are you doing in my house?" And I think even in the 40s, I think just because he's this lonely or sort of this individual scientist, and you've seen now that he's shrank a horse and stuff. He's doing this in the jungle on his own. Like you're just supposed to sort of like the audience is supposed to go, oh yeah, he's a baddie.
Mm-hmm.
He's the baddie. He's the weird one, so he's a baddie. But then, like, there is part of it, like say, this group of people just keep antagonizing him.
Yes. Well, right, and once you know somebody's the mad scientist, stop antagonizing, stop digging, right? I know you have this white male sort of like, well, we're not going to stand for that. It's I mean, literally, is one of the lines. Bullfinch says something like that to him as he's being examined. Like, oh, no, I refuse And it's so
he does, yeah.
defiant. It's like, what do you think you're gonna do? I mean, have a little modesty. I mean, this guy's obviously a genius. He might be a sociopath, but he's a genius. Yeah, I mean, it is very strange. Where did he get that horse?
It's Pedro's.
Oh, that was Pedro's.
That's Pedro's horse, Pinto. We keep saying, but what I was more interested in is at one point. So this is the thing about how this sort of film they want to keep sort of alluding to things in this film. Pedro's had this horse, Pinto. It's disappeared because obviously, Doctor Cyclops or Thor has run through all the other animals apart from a couple of chickens that are around. And now I would say those chickens are used for some good jokes. So there's a couple of little moments I thought were quite cool. But yeah, he's obviously like taken this horse in. And then shrank it down, and he's because you see him, he has a room with this device in that sort of, and he wears like a full protective gear. I love the fact, by the way, that they did that. That they're like, well, radiation's clearly dangerous, so he's going to wear this like lead-lined suit kind of thing. So that was kind of cool. But he shrinks down this horse. But then later on, when they break in, they just find 2 hoof prints in the dirt of the house, and I'm like, and then. There's a great moment where he's like, well, Pinto's here. And I think it's sort of like Stocks or whatever, looks around and goes, there's no horse here.
Right.
It's like, no, this is a 1-room domicile. And all you found is 2 hoof prints by the door. Like, it's so, I wasn't sure if Stockton was being sarcastic, if he was supposed to be trying to be funny, or if it was just an odd direction given. I don't know, but.
Yeah, I don't know either. I do like the hoof prints, but you're raising them reminds me of another sort of odd choice that this movie has, which is, why is there not more mystery? Yeah. Right? There should be a mystery of sort of what is he doing? What's happened to that horse I loved, right? Where these footprints lead nowhere. It's a 1-room house. Where are you going to hide this horse? There's just no sense of like. I mean, nobody says, what is he up to in this jungle? He had a promising career and then he disappeared. I mean, there's no sense of mystery here.
The character Mary says it once, and but her, it's not like you say, it's not this thing of like, well, what is he doing? It's what is it we are not allowed to see?
Right.
And so again, it comes back to them. Like, they're so self-centered. It's not like, what work is he doing? Like, like you say, like, there's nothing about what this guy is before. It's just like, well, why can't we see it? I'm important. Why can't I see it? Because even at the very beginning of the film, when Dr. Bullfinch is sent out there, like, and again, I don't know like what the relationship is for this thing. Like, some other person in an office just says, "You're going." And he's like, well, I don't know. And he says, yes, you are. Okay. That's sort of it. But this other professor or whatever that sends Bullfinch, they have a very brief conversation where I think Bullfinch is sort of like has heard of Dr. Thorkel by reputation and says, oh, he has like wild theories. But this other professor's like, well, I worked with him for a year. And basically sort of says like, so I know what he's like. And so, but there's no warning of going like, oh, no, he's clearly like potty. Like, he's clearly like off his rocker. They just send him out to the Peruvian jungle. So, like you say, there's nothing there to say like, oh yes, he was one of the greatest minds of that this institution ever had, and blah 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 blah. The usual stuff you'd hear. It's just get on your way and do as you're told. So that's how that scene sort of plays out.
Yeah, the setup for this movie is very strange. You're pointing out like it's not totally clear why they're going to the jungle in the first place. Why you at one point they say, oh, they can't bring Steve Baker, who wants to come, because he says, like Doctor Cyclops demanded only 4 of us come or something like that. When did that happen? Are you in the business of, I mean, what is their relationship that they want to honor that request? And it does seem to me that this comes back to the sort of transition from 30s to 50s sci-fi, that in the 50s it's like, yeah, okay, they're giant ants, right? We did them. You don't need much explanation. The giant ants are the thing. In the 30s, you don't need much explanation. The 30s don't do that 30-minute, thing that we do with like today. This would be start with Dr. Bullfinch, for 30 minutes, and we find out his relationship to his daughter, and who's going to say, "Daddy, don't go into the jungle."
Oh,
Something bad.
Mary would now be his daughter.
Yes, good point. I mean, we just have this endless stupid stuff, and I would just say, like, right, give me a stock character and get on with it.
Yeah.
So the 30s kind of give you that stock character, but usually they have that sense of mystery. They have that sense of like unveiling, of kind of peeling the onion and getting to, like it should be a big deal when you see, Dr. Thorkel for the first time. Like, right, it doesn't need to be, you brought up Apocalypse Now, and sort of I'm thinking of Heart of Darkness. Like, it doesn't have to be that level of like, we've gone through 200 pages before we meet this guy. But it does have to be a sense of, all right, there's a mystery to this. It means something, what we're doing, and we want the audience to, much like King Kong, right? Like, this is a journey you're going on. And so when you see Kong, that's coming. But when you see it, it's a big deal, and you've built it up well. This movie is not interested in doing any of that.
No.
And so it does seem to be a kind of transitional film for me.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is, there are things firing off my head about, and I might do it in a little minute, of the fixing, but you say about the transition, and that's true. It's like, because I can imagine that the discussion for this film, when they were in the setup, is all around the shrinking. What are those sets going to look like? How are those that rear projection special effects work? How are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? What have we got to build? Okay, we've got to build a giant canoe. Okay, we've got to build a giant table or a giant stair set, set of stairs. All that I could imagine being the focus, because that sort of like that third act where they've been shrunk and everything is the focus. That's what they're looking to do. And so everything up to that point, because that's the point, isn't it? What's the pitch of this is shrunken people being chased by mad scientists. That's the pitch, because that's what the flaming advertisements told me on. And so that 30 minutes that we've talked about, where you'd get to know the characters and you'd have that relationship build and all that sort of thing, and saying about that sort of father-daughter, that comes in the 50s. That was in one of the films we watched, was this idea of the sort of father-daughter. I think it was that sort of when Worlds Collide, I think, was the father-daughter relationship.
Who do we save, right, when the Earth
exactly
gets right?
Yeah. So some of that stuff's coming, but like the focus of this film is clearly like all that first act, that first bit is sort of like, okay, we just want to get to the shrunking, and then we want to do the bit. That's all this is about. This is about the spectacle. It's going back to like Just Imagine last week, as you said, the budget's in about what you're viewing. If this film's about what they wanted to show, and this is one of those early films of doing these kind of special effects and stuff. This is like that early version of 3D, isn't it? Like, yeah, the story is sort of like second tier to how many times can we poke things out of the screen for things to be like, oh, dodge that ball, dodge that finger, whatever it's going to be. It feels a little bit like that. But it's almost so many sort of easy fixes for this film, like, and a lot of it is cliched. Make it so that Mary is either a student of Bullfinch and they have a relationship of sort of like, where he can sacrifice himself to protect her or something. The Steve, what's his name? Bill Stockton, that sort of more
roguish, Han Solo type.
Yeah, exactly, the Han Solo type. He then sort of is the action one, so he's the one that sort of like he does wield the extra large scissors, but like he needs to be doing the action stuff later on. He becomes the sort of the rough and ready one that sort of ends up fighting an ant or something, or a rat or something. Like, he's the one that does that. And then you'd have like Pedro would unfortunately be the sort of, they'd probably have some sort of comedy sidekick, that would come in and sort of be, do you know what I mean? There'd be that sort of like, but then his death would be really heartfelt and sort of that sort of thing. But you would have that relationship. That setup would be either Dr. Thorkel has asked for someone to go down. This would either be the first mission or the second mission.
Yeah.
This is either the first mission. Dr. Thorkel has asked for this, but we know we haven't heard from him for 2 years, and we're not comfortable. So we're sending Bill Stockton with you as a sort of a guide and protector, an early Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford kind of type. Or a former group's gone down and we haven't heard from them.
That's better, right? Because it also implies that I hate how, whoever you're watching always is the ones who survive and get lucky,
Mhm.
And it's like, no one has survived this before, right? Until you're protagonist, because they're protagonists. So, I mean, I do like the idea that now he's lured people for these human experiments before, and maybe they find the bodies.
Well, that's what I'd want to see. They find a 4-inch pig, and then someone else going, "But this looks like a femur." Like,
Yeah.
And you go, "That's not in a pig," and you go, "Oh, that actually looks like a human femur." Like, that's really weird. Like, adding to that mystery. Like, how do we explain these sort of like? Because talk about Bullfinch as well and his arrogance. He literally finds 3 bones and goes, "This is a new species. I'm going to name it after me."
Yes. And I love the bones thing. I love the sort of discussion of, there's a miniature pig. I mean, it's a little absurd in the Peruvian jungle, but that is that kind of like island evolution sort of, taken to a weird degree if it's really, 3 inches long or something. But okay. But you're right. Yeah, I mean, that does characterize Bullfinch completely. I mean, he's stupid too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, but he's and I'll phrase this carefully. He's the pretentious academic, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Doing that sort of thing. Like, he hasn't been
ivory tower.
Yes, that sort of thing I'm looking for. Like, he's never been outside of academia. Like, he thinks he's smarter than everyone, and now he's going to be faced with a situation he doesn't know how to handle, and that's where you get that sort of like the Bill Stockton sort of character who's like, but I can hack away at the jungle and swing from ropes and all that kind of stuff. Like, you don't want the sort of fatherly professor type. I kind of like the Bullfinch character. You need him to be that character to sort of like to create the situations. But yeah, I think that sort of there just needs to be a better kickoff to why these things are taking place.
Yeah, I agree. And I like all of those fixes. I mean, for me, it's that sense of selling it and selling that mystery, right? And I think some of those fixes would go a long way in terms of, this was a great scientist. He's gone missing. We've heard rumors. We sent people before. They have never come back. So there's more of a mystery. I mean, we should see them going through the jungle, for all of the money, getting there should be a difficult task. I'm also a little disappointed in sort of how small the set is. It's weird, so to speak. It's weird that they spend so much money. And clearly, I mean, this is not a big budget movie, but they spent so much money on those oversized sets. And we both agree they're done fantastically. It's great fun. They match really well, but why does the Doctor Cyclops, why does he live in a 1-room place with a pit, an open air pit with his, device hanging from it, and basically that 1-room house has a stairway down to the pit? That's it, and that's all. That's all the set you have. And there's a little bit of a fence, I guess, to keep the copious, wild, murderous animals that are surrounding this house out.
This 2-foot wooden fence has been very good at keeping bears out, apparently.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Cayman tigers are no, got better things to do today.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and it's clearly that there's a budget restraint on this. And it wouldn't even surprise me if some of this is reconditioned sets from other films. That obviously they do that kind of thing. But I think this thing about it being this 1-room thing, it's showing that it's not about the opulence. It's not about having some major thing because he calls it his house, his laboratory, or whatever. This is more again that thing about how like obsessed he is with this thing. Like he's nothing more than his work. And so he doesn't want anything more than this. But you're right. Like they could sort of expand on this set and do more. But I think
that's not a bad characteristic to be obsessed with your work. I mean, and think about how what you just said contrasts to what you pointed out about Bullfinch being totally egotistical, right? This opulence and Steve Baker, demanding. I mean, that they've discovered a rich mine. He wants to become rich. I mean, in a weird way, Dr. Cyclops seems better than them. He
Yeah.
just cares about this work. He's a sociopath, but he's really focused on his work. He
Yeah,
doesn't
and he
want
has-
money or a palace.
And he has hurt, and he has shrank animals and stuff and whatever. But like, I don't think they don't ever seem hurt. Like, the horse doesn't seem in pain at any point. It's only when the humans arrive that things start to go pear-shaped or go a bit wrong. So yeah, this is why, like, if they wanted to make this sort of the fear of the the diabolical Doctor Cyclops, then make him diabolical. Like, he just isn't at this point. Like you say, it's the introduction of these characters. And you're right. I think you're right. You've talked me around. Bullfinch is the real problem here.
Yes, he's
but
the villain.
Yeah, but because it should be. Because the other thing is as well, what's his reasoning for doing this? Like, he wants to, reduce or shrink things down using radium and whatever. But there's never a point at which he says that what betterment this will provide for humanity. We're so used now to this thing of, I'm obsessed with my work, but this can provide this for humanity. Like, we can save, whatever. I can stop. We can stop, hunger. We can stop world hunger. I can solve world hunger. I can do this. I can do that. But this part of me going like, what is other than to just do it? What's his motivation for doing this? Is it some sort of humanitarian thing, or is it just whatever? And again, that's never addressed. He's just doing it because he can or he wants to.
Now, there's a weird line on the Wikipedia page for this film that begins the plot summary. A scientist attempts to shrink all of humanity to reduce our impact on the environment. Not in what I saw. I mean, that would be fascinating, right? It's an ecological motivation, Ra's al Ghul, but no, that's not the case here. It's not clear why he's doing this.
No. There was a film a couple of years ago where Matt Damon gets shrunk down to live in a small house, a more society. Do you remember? I never saw it.
Very vaguely.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this is actually a prequel to that film. So Doctor Cyclops, Dr. Thorkel actually perfected the technology that was then used in the Matt Damon film. No, I don't know. Yeah, that line is, they may have put it into the Wikipedia. I'm pretty sure it's not in the film.
I agree. It's not in what I saw. But there's so much of this film that just sort of is not really trying to explain itself. That I'm not sure if there isn't some line that I sort of missed. I mean, I was busy figuring out if Bullfinch had survived.
Can I just read to the back? I want to read the back of the DVD then, right? So it's by Fabulous. So it's a fabulous DVD case. But it says here, set in the Peruvian jungle, this 1940 landmark science fiction adventure. Okay, directed by pioneering filmmaker Ernst Schodak, follows 4 explorers as they search for legendary physicist Doctor Cyclops. It's not his real name. When they discover them,
legendary also?
No, never mentioned.
Is he a physicist? I guess. I mean, he's using radium, right? But I mean, his background is not. We don't know what he has a PhD in. He could have a PhD in English. When
they discover their missing colleague, they find his brilliant mind has been warped by radiation and decide to return him to civilization for psychiatric help.
No,
none of that happens in this film.
and that's describing another film that's better, right? That has motivation. Like, doctor, you're a brilliant mind, but you've been warped by your work. You need help. We're taking you back. No, I refuse.
Yeah. No, there is one confrontation where they steal his notes off him to look at them. And that's it. And even then, they don't talk about the conversation is not about taking him back. It's about the ore. It's about the mining ore. So what this should be is 4 people are sent down to a Peruvian jungle and come across Dr. Thorkel and decide to set up a mining corporation and steal his land.
Yeah, not to mention that if Bullfinch, like, I could imagine Bullfinch finding out about all these shrunken animals and saying, Dr. Thorkel, we could make a deal here. You shrink out many, many species, and I will claim that I have discovered them and name them after myself.
Yes.
That would seem to be right up. Now, I don't believe your device works, but I'm quite content to name these species.
To steal your work.
What a motivation.
The thing is, again, like, let's. I mean, I want to sort of like just very as we sort of we're getting close to the end. I want to sort of tap into, because this does come to the reason behind this, motivations and things. This thing is the mad scientist, the mad professor. We talk about Doctor, the Island of Dr. Moreau as being one of the touchstones for me when watching this film. And I love that book. I haven't read it for years, but I've read that several times as a kid. But the other one that jumped to mind about this, when you just said about that and the animals and stuff, he's like John Hammond in Jurassic Park.
Yeah, I thought about that too.
That thing of just sort of like, and there's obviously the Ian Malcolm line, which gets bandied around all the time now. Like, you were so concerned about whether you could, you didn't decide whether you should. And again, like that could even be a motivation in this. Like, this is dangerous work. Like, what you are doing is dangerous. Just because you can do this doesn't mean you should do this. Like, there's real radiation problems or what. Like, but the really, like I say, the big problem underlying this film is the fact that, like, Dr. Cyclops, as you said, just isn't a threat for the first part of the film. Like, going to find him there is no motivation or justification for it. Like, he needs to be more of his reveal. Again, like, if this was remade now, Dr. Cyclops would be played by some sort of big name, senior actor that would have sort of gravitas, and he wouldn't appear until the end of the first act, and it would, like you say, it would be like a major reveal of him, sort of like some sliding door. I can think of Blofeld kind of sort of reveal, sort of like a sliding door opening, him going, you've made it through, you've met my colleagues, or that sort of, like, he would have that mystery and that sinisterness would be there. But this film's so not focused on that. It's simply focused on having the miniaturization so they can do the set pieces. That's what this film is. And again, this sort of comes back to what we were saying last episode about Just Imagine, when we said, like, the plot barely makes sense in places, but the set pieces are brilliant.
Yeah.
And so this feels the same thing. We're like, the plot barely makes sense. And I'm not saying that future films are any better, because we're going to cover Transformers by Michael Bay later on, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to have the same statement again. Like, the plot barely makes sense, but the set pieces are ace. And I feel that this is the same. This is entertainment. This is almost like that blockbuster kind of thing, isn't it? Like, look at what we can do with the special effects. Isn't it cool?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that, like, Transformers has more fleshed out characters. They're not all convincing, but, like, and it does sell, like, the mystery and stuff. But yeah, I mean, and I think that, like, Just Imagine has a kind of, like, charm to it. Like, the characters are a little more fleshed out that I don't find here. But having said that, like, I mean, this is enjoyable. This is a cool movie. I do find myself thinking, like, this is 1940. I love that he's doing, radiation experiments. It's a little like gamma rays causing the Incredible Hulk. Like, not sure this is how that works. But let's keep in mind that in 1940, it was absolutely okay to do this stuff to animals.
Yes.
I mean, look, we sent animals into outer space. Nobody was worried about retrieving them when they burned up in re-entry. Nobody was going to euthanize them instead of they burn up alive, right? I mean, and that was the 60s. So, this is 1940. Is what he's doing really that bad? I mean, he doesn't really do anything bad by social standards until he really goes after these people. But, I guess it's not cool even then to shrink people against their will. But he doesn't really try to kill them. They would have just grown out of it.
Yeah. He literally says, yeah, we know. And we see that. Like, the end of the film, they turn up normal and, in love. It must have been the 2 months interceding and where they grew up that the two characters fell in love. But yeah, there's no sort of like side effects or sort of like after effects of this. So they could have just stuck around and left and it would have proven him right. I don't know. Yeah, it feels motivationless in so many ways. And you've convinced me as well that actually, like, Dr. Bullfinch is a problem and really caused all the problems, and they further antagonize him by preparing to shoot him in the face once he's asleep.
Yeah, that usually doesn't help a relationship. I've tried. It does not keep a relationship together. You know, some people have kids. I prefer shotgun threats. You know? I'm joking. That's terrible. Don't do that. Blah, blah, blah.
Well, yeah, maybe it's for this. Let's say this. What they call it, shotgun wedding.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're coming to the end. So let's talk about final thoughts then for Doctor Cyclops, 1940s Doctor Cyclops. Julian, what are your final thoughts for Doctor Cyclops?
I do think it's a flawed movie. I do think you know, you've pointed out, you know, ways to improve it. I do think it's a lot of fun, especially once they get shrunk. It's a mess until then. I found myself pausing multiple times and saying, like, what's going on again? Did I, you know, and it's like, all right, there's one line of dialogue. I even did go back to Bullfinch's death and think, you know, did I miss something? So I did keep rewinding to solve problems. But having said that, once they're shrunk, it is sort of a tour de force of, you know, imagination, set design. Not everything makes perfect sense, but, you know, I mean, for a 1940, you know, sort of film, having all of that, those sets and imagination, it's really having fun. And then it doesn't know what to do with it, you know. In the end, right, race arrived. What are your thoughts?
Very much the same. I mean, the one thing I will say is that this is a 74-minute film. You know, it's not long. Like you said, he gets in, he gets out, and you know, we talk about sort of like you're talking about like Peter Jackson's King Kong. King Kong itself is 15 minutes longer than this film.
Yeah,
and so in that 15 minutes could have done a lot of good in a film like this. So yeah, the opening and the justifications are baffling and a bit of a mess. The ending is weird. Like, it just sort of stops where they're just like, well, we're not going to talk about that again, and then that's it. But that section of once they are shrank, and once they are revealed to have been shrank in the basement and stuff, from that point on and to the sort of finale, it is really good fun. There's some amazing sets. Even I have to say, even before that, like when they're traveling and they go to Peru, there's a great sort of like where they meet the guy for the mules, and there's all the sort of the matte painting backgrounds and all that sort of stuff. I loved all of that. So I loved how this film looks. But just the set piece they're doing, like that one in particular where they have it laid out and there's the giant book and you've got Pedro on top of the table and they're doing this, is so well orchestrated that it looks so good that it doesn't look like a giant set. It literally looks like, because the way they've done perspective, it literally looks like, I was going, have they done back projection here? Like, how's this done? Oh no, this just must be a massive table that Pedro is stood on. Like, it's really well done. So I was really impressed with all that. I really enjoyed all that. I think, yeah, when they go into the jungle and they fight, they sort of have a confrontation with an alligator, and they've got confrontation with Satanas. And all this. Like, it's all good fun. It's all very good fun. Very sort of precursor to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and Fantastic Voyage. Just we're going to cover some great stuff in there. But unfortunately, I say it just barely makes any sense. And so it's sort of like you go, yeah, all right. As I say, we've sort of debated the point of this film. I'm so glad there were bits that you didn't get, because I watched this film and I was sat downstairs watching this, and I got to the end and there was a part I was like, oh, did I fall asleep at one? Did I not realise? I literally thought, like, did my eyes closed and I just didn't realise I'd fallen asleep for a couple of minutes, because there's several things that don't make any sense. And the Dr. Bullfinch one was the main one where I was like, have I missed an entire scene that explains that he's dead? So yeah, there are bits then they're just not interested in from a story standpoint, and it shows. But again, if this is coming from the person that made King Kong, it makes total sense when you see the scene when Bullfinch is being examined and that giant hand comes in and the fingers close round him and he's picked up. And yeah, you know, that kind of level of special effects would look good, would look good and look fine 20 years after this film was made. If they did that and it came out in 1960, I'd be wow, that looks pretty good. So it really was pushing the bounds of what was possible in 1940. So fair play to him. So well done for that.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you, as a final note, what happens to Satanus and to the dog?
I'm assuming they get left in the Peruvian jungle and eaten by a bear. That's the best I can guess.
Well, you know,
But there's a 2-month
Satanus is kind of like chased out of the fence, and I guess, you know, is eaten by a wild animal or something.
Yeah.
But the dog isn't there at the ending. I do like the stuff with sort of like, he recognizes me, you know?
Yes.
That's kind of cool. But, you know, where's he at the ending?
I was hoping, they should have him on a lead. They should have taken the dog with them, really. But there's a 2-month period where they're obviously at Dr. Satanus's location, and they're growing back into their original sizes. Of like, God knows what happened in that 2-month period.
It would have been so easy. I think a montage, you know, would have been so great there, just of them at different sizes, you know, and you're doing rear projection, you know, like that's fine. Just give us, you know, and then you show them falling in love just in, you know, montages. They ate that dog, didn't they?
That's pretty much, that sort of jumped into my head as well. They were like, at some point, they were like, you know, shrinking things is pointless, growing things is better. But
well, it's a lot of meat when you're 12 inches tall.
That's very true. That would have lasted a long time, possibly 2 months.
Yeah, exactly.
I have to say as well, there's one thing before we sort of finish, is the science of this. I always struggle with this, and I've always struggled with this, even when I was younger. This idea of shrinking and growing something clearly makes no sense, because matter is matter, and it wasn't until I think I remember reading something, again, must have been in my teens, of like it was all these things you see, and it was like, it's not possible, because you can't increase. There are 2 scenarios. You either introduce more atoms or remove atoms to reduce the size, or you condense them. And so, well, you know, in which case, or you increase the distance between them,
right,
to make things
or
bigger.
Decrease.
Yeah, exactly. You either increase or decrease. So the density will always remain the same, and therefore, if you shrink down, that becomes you become so dense that your body collapses in on itself.
Right.
Or if you were to grow, you become so unstable that you would fall apart. So it's always been one of those sort of science fiction tropes that's really bothered me, because I'm just like, yeah, that's just. And I know there's other things I'm like, you know, that won't work, but for some reason, shrinking and growing just really has been one of my pet peeves. Of sort of like, it looks good, and I like the trope in cinema, but like as a science fiction thing, I'm like, oh, that's, you know, it doesn't work. Ant-Man.
I've had the same thought since I was a kid, and I always focused on, like, you know, molecules, and, you know, it's like, all right, well, you know, doesn't the strong force play a hand here? You know, I mean, yeah, I mean, but then there are other things, like, I mean, it's just weird that you know, most of the universe is space, right? Atoms are mostly the space between atoms, and even between electrons and the nucleus. You know, the space between atoms is vast, is enormous. Comparatively.
Yeah, when you look at that when you're down to that sort of subatomical, that sort of molecular level, yeah.
And so, I mean, there's room to compress them, but that doesn't work physically. And then, you know, like, I mean, it's weird in real life, like how does a knife composed of atoms that's mostly space then cut through a piece of paper that's composed of atoms that's empty space? I don't pretend to understand that. Yeah. But I know that the science behind shrinking people is bullshit.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just, the physics. I don't, like you say, I don't understand the physics of it. I'm sure there's some very complicated sort of like equations that explain sort of how density of you know, different things work and stuff, and why metal is metal and wood is wood, and paper, you know, so on and so forth. But still, like you say, shrinking people is bullshit, and it bothers me. So. Anyway, we shall end on that note. So yes, we are jumping forward again. These 2 have been new entries, but the next one is our first sequel. We are bringing back an old friend, and it's going to be Godzilla Rides Again, from 1954. 55. It's a pretty year, look, was it 56? But we've done the 30s, we've done the 40s. Now we're doing a couple of films in the 50s. And I actually believe we've got so the next two films, we've got the first sequel, our first sequel entry, and our first, well, pre-make. It's not a remake, it's a pre-make, I suppose. It's the original. We obviously did The Fly, and we're going to be doing The Fly again, sort of, which is 1959, 58. So we've got a couple of 50s films coming up, which is fantastic. So doing another decade now. We're doing forward into the next decade, which is great gathering steam. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed our talk about Doctor Cyclops. Please go and try and check it out. It is worth seeing. It's a fun film. It's I picked up on DVD for like £3, and it must be available at other places. I'm sure you can find it. But if you like what we are doing, you will notice now that there are things coming out. You will hear the Trekking Through the Twilight Zone is being released now. We're going back to the first season, the first ever episodes, and they'll be released between these episodes, so you can get the main feed and reviews, and you're then going to get these little shorts every other week as well. But if you want to get ahead and you want to go and find out more, all the way up to sort of season 2 of the Twilight Zone and beyond, because they're being released weekly on the Patreon, go check out our Patreon. And also on there is Creator Corner, 30-minute thoughts, all this podcasting stuff, loads of great content. So go and check that out, link down below. But for now, Julian, thank you very much for talking Dr. Cyclops with me. Great fun.
Always my pleasure.
And yeah. And the next episode, we will be taking on Godzilla Raids Again. So
from the small to the big.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah, something for some reason I'm willing to accept an irradiated monster.
Lizard, the size of a skyscraper.
Yeah.
That's just proper science.
That's right. Yeah, that's backed up by science. But shrinking people's bullshit. But anyway, for now, ladies and gentlemen,
I'm the same way. No, I can deal with Godzilla. Lightsabers don't make sense, damn it.
Well, we are doing Empire Strikes Back. When we get there, we'll have that discussion as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and we shall see you on the next episode.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.